Colorado Territory, year 1876. A young widow stands against fire, betrayal, and a land-hungry cattle baron. Could a mother's love truly hold when the whole town bets on her fall? What secret lies hidden in the scar of the man who fights by her side? Stay with this story, because what unfolds in Silver Creek will make you question, how far would you go to protect your family? Welcome to WestDream Tales, where forgotten stories of the Wild West come alive. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and join us on a journey through fire, love, and the legends that shaped the frontier. The wind carried dust down the single road into Silver Creek, a small town on the edge of the Colorado Territory. By dawn, the sky was pale gray, and the charred skeleton of the Holt Ranch still smoked against the horizon. A woman stood there barefoot, holding her boy close, her dress torn, her face streaked with ash. Clara Holt did not cry. Her dark eyes burned as she looked over the land that had been her husband's pride. Behind her, the child pressed his small hands into her skirt, searching for safety where none seemed left. The townsfolk gathered in silence, boots crunching against gravel. Their whispers rolled like snakes in the dust. A widow can't hold a ranch. She'll sell before the week is out. They did not bother lowering their voices. Then Caleb Boone rode forward, his black stallion stamping in the dirt. Boone was the kind of man who carried power like a weapon, wide shoulders, polished boots, a silver watch chain flashing under the morning sunday. He looked down at Clara as though weighing cattle. Not a woman with a boy. You have two choices, Boone said, his voice carrying across the crowd. Marry me, or starve. His smile was not kindness, but claim, as though the land and the woman were both already his. Clara held her breath, her heart hammering. She could feel Ethan, her 8-year-old, clutching tighter. She thought of John, her husband, buried under the cottonwood tree just 3 weeks past. His voice still lingered in her memory. Protect the boy. Don't let them take what's ours. Her lips parted, but no words came. Around her, the crowd waited, some with pity, some with hunger for drama. Boone's men shifted, rifles at their sides. Even the sheriff kept his silence. Silver Creek belonged to Boone, and everyone knew it. Then something stirred in Clara. She pushed Ethan gently behind her, straightening her shoulders against the dust. Her voice came quiet but sharp as a blade. This land is mine, and I will not be your wife. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Boone's smile vanished. His stallion pawed the ground, impatient, echoing the tension, twisting the air. But Boone only tipped his hat and leaned down. We'll see how long you last, Widow Holt. He rode away, his men following, laughter trailing like smoke. The townsfolk scattered, whispering harder now. Some shook their heads, others spat in the dirt. Only Clara remained, standing before the ruins, with her son at her side. Night fell cold on the valley. The cabin walls still smoldered, and the stars above stretched endless. Clara sat with Ethan on the porch step that survived the fire. He leaned against her shoulder, the smell of smoke in his hair. She wrapped an arm around him, pressing her cheek to his crown. For the first time, the fear crept in. How could she feed him when the pantry was ash? How could she defend the land with no men left? And yet, in the silence of the night, Clara felt something unexpected. Not weakness, but a fierce spark. Ethan stirred, lifting his face. Mama, he whispered, are we leaving? His voice cracked with the weight no child should carry. She kissed his hair softly, her arm tightening. No, son, this is our home. We're not running. Her words were quiet, but the fire in them was stronger than the flames that had devoured their house. The boy closed his eyes, and for the first time since the funeral, sleep came. Clara kept watch, eyes open against the dark, shotgun resting across her knees. Every sound of the wind, every shifting shadow, she marked. Alone, she vowed she would not fall. By morning, Clara rose with ash on her skin and determination in her bones. She carried Ethan to the river to wash, then walked back barefoot across the scarred earth. A single stalk of corn still stood in the corner of the field. Blackened but upright, she touched it, and for reasons she could not name, she felt hope stir. At the edge of the clearing, a figure watched from the saddle of a bay horse. He said nothing, only tipped his hat when her eyes met his. She did not know his name. Not yet, but something in the angle of his jaw and the way he carried his rifle hinted at a history tied to her husband's blood. Clara held Ethan close, unaware of how quickly fate was moving. Boone thought he had crushed her spirit, but that morning on Silver Creek, something else was beginning, something even Boone could not foresee. Spring in the Colorado Territory arrived with pale green shoots along the valley. But for Clara Holt, the season carried only grief. Just 3 weeks earlier, her husband John had been buried beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek. His grave was still fresh, marked only by a wooden cross that leaned slightly in the wind. The day he was killed had begun like any other. John had loaded their wagon with sacks of grain bound for Denver, a shipment that could pay the ranch's debts for the season. Clara had stood in the doorway, shading her eyes as he tipped his hat, promising to return by Sunday supper. But John never came home. Word spread by dusk that riders had found his wagon on the canyon road, the grain scattered, horses missing, and John lying silent in the dust. Clara remembered rushing to the site, her skirts catching on the rocks, her hands shaking as she touched his still body. No witnesses had seen who pulled the trigger. The sheriff muttered something about bandits, but Clara knew better. Bandits did not leave deeds behind. And within a week, Caleb Boone's lawyer arrived with papers challenging the Holt claim to their land. Clara signed nothing. She clutched the deed John had kept locked in a tin box under the floorboard, her knuckles white. At night, she sat by the fire, Ethan curled against her lap, while outside, coyotes sang, and Boone's men lingered too close along the fence line. Each day brought fresh trial. The well near the barn dried suddenly, the wooden beams splintered as though by axe. A stack of hay caught fire without cause. Cattle strayed through a gate left open, trampling the corn seedlings Clara had planted with trembling hands. She sought help in town, but the doors closed quick when she knocked. Mrs. Green at the store offered a glance of pity, yet whispered, "You can't fight Boone. Best take his offer." Even the preacher avoided her eyes on Sunday, bowing his head deeper when Boone passed the collection plate. Only Ethan gave her strength. The boy asked questions she could not answer, why men came at night, why neighbors turned their backs. Yet when he clung to her waist and whispered, "We can fix it, Mama," she found herself believing, if only for his sake. One evening, Clara lifted John's Winchester rifle from the rack above the mantel. It was heavy in her hands, smelling faintly of oil and smoke. She stepped into the yard, loaded a single round, and raised it toward a tin can on the fence. The shot cracked through the twilight, missing wide. But in that moment, something shifted inside her. Her arms ached, her ears rang, yet she smiled despite herself. Ethan clapped small hands, shouting, "You almost hit it!" For the first time since John's death, Clara laughed, brief and fragile, but real. Days turned into weeks. She rose before dawn to mend fences, fetched water from the distant creek, and taught herself to steady the rifle with both hands. Ethan carried wood and fed chickens, his small shoulders squaring as if he bore half her load. Together, they moved like two halves of a broken whole, holding on by sheer will. But Boone did not relent. One stormy night, riders thundered past the house, whooping and firing shots into the sky. Windows shattered, the barn door split, and Clara woke with Ethan screaming in her arms. She crouched beside the bed, shotgun ready, every muscle strung tight as a bow. The riders never entered, content to leave fear behind. Yet fear hardened into something else. By morning, Clara's jaw was set, her hair tied back, her hands blistered raw from gripping the shovel. She would not surrender. It was then a stranger appeared at the edge of her field. He rode a bay horse, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing a weathered face. He did not speak at first, only watched as Clara struggled to lift a fallen beam from the chicken coop. At last he dismounted, lifting the timber with one hand as though it weighed nothing. "Name's Jack Dwyer," he said, voice low, eyes steady. "I knew your husband." Clara froze, breath caught in her chest. The name tugged at memory. John had spoken of a Jack who'd ridden beside him during the war. She searched the man's eyes and saw the same tired steel she remembered in John's after long days of work. "I don't need pity," she said quickly, pushing hair from her face. Her cheeks burned, not just from sun but from the closeness of another man. Jack shook his head. "Not pity, debt." His gaze shifted to Ethan, who peeked from behind her skirts. "John saved me once. I figure it's time I return the favor." From that day, Jack came often. He showed Clara how to brace her stance when firing, how to breathe slow before the trigger pull. He taught Ethan to tie knots, to set traps for rabbits, to ride bareback without fear. Around the fire at night, his stories drew laughter from the boy, and sometimes even from Clara. Still, she kept her distance. At times when Jack's hand brushed hers passing a tool, she felt a jolt she did not expect. It frightened her, this spark in the shadow of grief, so she pulled away, busying herself with chores, though her heart raced long after. The twist came not in Jack's presence, but in his silence. One evening, Clara overheard him speaking low to himself by the barn. Boone's name passed his lips, and something about an old debt unsettled her. She realized Jack knew more of John's death than he admitted. But before she could confront him, Boone struck again. At dusk, flames rose from the far pasture, haystacks ablaze. Clara grabbed the rifle, racing with Ethan beside her, Jack already mounting his horse. Together they beat back the fire with blankets, smoke stinging their eyes, sparks catching in their hair. When the flames finally died, Clara collapsed in the dirt, coughing. Ethan pressed against her chest. Jack knelt close, his hand firm on her shoulder. Their eyes locked, raw with exhaustion, and for a fleeting moment, Clara leaned against him, her cheek brushing his shirt damp with sweat. The intimacy was brief, fragile, but it lingered after he pulled away. Clara's heart thudded, torn between fear of Boone, grief for John, and something new she dared not name. Night settled heavy, the smell of smoke clinging to the valley. Clara lay awake, Ethan asleep in her arms, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere outside, Jack's footsteps faded, and she wondered what truths he carried. The widow of Silver Creek had lost everything but her will. Yet, beneath the ashes of spring, something stronger was rising, a fire that Boone's cruelty could not extinguish, and a secret that might change everything when revealed. Summer pressed hard over Silver Creek, the sun beating down on parched fields and brittle fences. Clara Holt rose each day before dawn, her dress damp with sweat before the rooster crowed. She carried water, mended broken rails, and prayed the corn would hold despite the heat. Ethan followed at her heels, a small shadow determined to be useful. He fetched tools, gathered eggs, and stood straight when Clara corrected his stance with the wooden hoe. "Like this, son," she would say, her hand guiding his, their movements in rhythm against the endless dust. Jack Dwyer became part of the rhythm too, his horse tied near the fence, his boots crunching steady across the yard. He spoke little, but his actions filled the silence, sawing beams, repairing hinges, steadying Clara's hands on the rifle when the tremor of fatigue betrayed her strength. At night, the three of them gathered on the porch, the air thick with crickets. Ethan leaned sleep-heavy against Clara's arm, his head nodding as Jack told quiet tales of trails and rivers far beyond Colorado. Sometimes, Clara's laughter slipped free, surprising even herself, yet shadows lingered. Boone's riders still prowled the ridges, leaving gates unlatched, carving threats into barnwood. One morning, Clara woke to find a calf missing, tracks leading toward Boone's pasture. She clenched her jaw, knowing it was no accident. That evening, she saddled the mare herself, Ethan clutching her waist as they rode. The boy's heart pounded fast against her back, but his grip was firm. They found the calf in Boone's corral, penned between his branded cattle as though it had always belonged there. Boone stepped out from the shadows, cigar smoke curling in the twilight. "Lost something, Widow Holt?" he drawled, lips twisting around his teeth. His men chuckled behind him, rifles leaning casual but ready. Clara sat tall in the saddle, forcing her voice steady. "That calf carries my brand." Her eyes locked on Boone, daring him to deny what was plain. Boone exhaled a stream of smoke, flicking ash to the dirt. "Everything in this valley answers to me. Best you remember that." His words rolled like thunder, yet Clara did not flinch. She turned her horse, Ethan clinging tight, and rode away, the laughter of men chasing them down the road. That night, Clara's hands trembled as she washed Ethan's face by lamplight. He looked up, eyes fierce, and whispered, "Mama, we'll get stronger." She kissed his forehead, her arms tightening around his shoulders, drawing courage from his resolve. Days later, Jack found her in the field, struggling with a stubborn plow. Without a word, he stepped in, gripping the handles beside her. Their arms brushed, sweat mingling, breath heavy in the heat. For a moment, Clara leaned into the strength at her side, her cheek almost brushing his shoulder. She pulled away quickly, but the warmth lingered, unspoken. Then came the storm. Thunder split the sky, rain sweeping down in sheets, wind ripping shingles from the roof. In the chaos, Boone's riders struck again, torches flaring against the night. They drove cattle through the fences, flames licking along the barn wall. Clara shoved Ethan into the cellar, her voice fierce, though fear clawed her chest. She grabbed the shotgun, boots splashing through mud, hair plastered to her face. Jack was already outside, firing into the storm, his figure a blur in the downpour. The fight was chaos. Horses screamed, men shouted, and fire battled rain. Clara fired once, the kick bruising her shoulder, but the shot sent a rider spinning into the mud. Another came close, lasso swinging, and Jack cut him down before the rope caught. Through smoke and rain, Boone appeared astride his stallion, his eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. He raised his pistol, aimed at Clara, and in that instant time seemed to slow. She froze, every heartbeat echoing, until Jack lunged, tackling the horse's bridle. The shot rang wide, sparking off stone. Boone cursed, retreating into the storm as his men scattered. The fire hissed out under the rain, leaving the yard scorched but standing. Clara collapsed to her knees, gasping, shotgun slipping from her grip. Jack's hand caught her shoulder, steadying her as the thunder rolled away. Ethan scrambled from the cellar, flinging his arms around her waist. Clara held him tight, tears lost in the rain. Over his head, her eyes met Jack's, a silent vow forged in fire and storm. But as the storm cleared, Clara noticed something that chilled her more than Boone's threats. Jack's hand was bleeding, the skin torn where Boone's stallion had thrown him. Etched faintly into his wrist was an old scar, one she recognized from John's stories, a mark of betrayal from years past. She said nothing that night, but the weight of it settled heavy in her chest. Jack was more than he claimed, and the truth of it might be the sharpest storm still to come. Autumn tightened its grip on Silver Creek, the nights colder, the fields rimmed with frost at dawn. Clara Holt woke each morning with breath rising in pale clouds, her body stiff but her will unbroken. Each day was lived in the shadow of Boone's promise. Each night carried the weight of waiting. The town watched her with mixed eyes. Some whispered in pity, others in quiet mockery, all convinced she would not last the winter. At church pews, at the store counter, she felt their judgment as keenly as the cold wind pressing through her dress. Jack Dwyer remained close, splitting wood, mending roofs, the rhythm of his labor steady as the ticking of a clock. His silence was company, but Clara could not shake the memory of the scar on his wrist. She carried her questions like stones in her chest, too heavy to voice. One evening, when the sky burned red, Ethan asked softly, "Mama, will Boone come again?" Clara kissed his forehead, drawing him close. "He always comes again," she whispered, "but this time, we'll be ready." Readiness meant sacrifice. Night after night, she practiced with the rifle, Jack's hands brushing her shoulders as he adjusted her aim. Sometimes their closeness slowed her breath, her cheek nearly grazing his arm. Yet the space between them always returned. Filled with silence, neither dared break. Boone's riders came once more in early October, galloping through the pasture at midnight. Shots rang sharp, scattering cattle into the hills. Clara and Jack gave chase, lanterns swinging. Ethan left trembling in the cellar. They recovered little, but Clara's resolve sharpened like a blade. Soon after, the sheriff appeared at her door, hat twisting in nervous hands. His voice carried Boone's demand: surrender the land or face fire. Clara stood tall, her eyes hard as iron. "Tell Boone I've already buried one man. I will not bury my son because of him." Jack urged her to leave. "Denver's safer. Take the boy and go east." But Clara's gaze held the horizon steady. "This is John's grave, Ethan's future. I will not run." Her words settled between them, like stone. The reckoning came on a night without moon. Wind screamed through the valley, carrying the stench of kerosene. Clara jolted awake to pounding hooves, shouts tearing the dark, flames arcing high as torches lit the barn and haystack. She seized Ethan, heart hammering, smoke already pouring through cracks in the cabin. Jack shoved the boy into her arms, shouting over the roar, "Get him below now!" Clara stumbled through the haze, lowering her son into the cellar's hollow dark. When she turned, Boone filled the doorway, his frame cut against firelight. His pistol gleamed, his grin twisted. "End of the line, Widow Holt," he said, voice steady, cruel. Clara raised the shotgun, arms steady despite the shaking inside. Boone stepped closer, savoring every stride. Before she could fire, Jack lunged, striking Boone sideways. The pistol cracked, splintering wood inches from Clara's head. The fight spilled into the yard. Flames roared, sparks rained down, mud churned under boots. Jack and Boone grappled, fists striking, bodies slamming against the ground. Boone fought with rage, Jack with desperate resolve. Clara lifted her shotgun, eyes stinging with smoke. Her finger hovered on the trigger, but a cry rose from the cellar. Ethan's voice, sharp with fear. The sound cut deeper than any threat. Boone used the moment, wrenching free, slamming Jack to the dirt. He raised his pistol, muzzle aimed at Clara. The world narrowed to steel and fire, her breath locked in her chest. A shot cracked through the night, but not from Boone's hand. One of his own men, standing in the fire's glow, had turned his rifle. Boone staggered, shock flashing across his face. Disbelief etched deeper than the wound itself. He fell to the mud, pistol slipping from his grasp. The riders who had once cheered him stood frozen, their loyalty shattered in silence. Boone's reign in Silver Creek ended not with Clara's bullet, but with the weight of his own cruelty breaking his hold. The yard grew still except for the hiss of rain dousing flames. Clara lowered her shotgun, breath ragged, Ethan clutching at her skirt. Jack pulled himself upright, battered, blood streaking his jaw. Their eyes met through the smoke, heavy with things neither dared speak. Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm as if grounding herself. For a moment, his warmth steadied her trembling. Yet the scar on his wrist caught the firelight, a reminder that the truth between them still lay buried. Dawn rose over blackened wood and ash. The barn was gone, the cabin scarred, but standing. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the yard, their whispers silenced, their eyes filled with something new. Respect, perhaps, or shame. Clara stood before them, Ethan at her side, her back unbowed. Boone was gone, but the silence Jack carried still lingered, heavy as the smoke that clung to the valley. The storm had passed, yet she knew another waited, woven in secrets that could still undo everything she had fought to keep. The morning after Boone's fall carried an uneasy stillness. Smoke clung to the valley, curling through the ruined barn and scorched fences. Clara Holt stood with her son beside her, the shotgun still heavy in her hands, though the fight was over. Neighbors gathered along the edge of her land, drawn by the fire and the gunfire of the night before. Where once they had whispered against her, now they stood silent, their faces lined with respect or shame. Clara met their eyes without a word. Ethan pressed close against her side. By midday, the townsfolk helped in small ways. Boards were carried, buckets passed, ashes shoveled aside. Not one spoke of Boone, yet his absence hung in the air like thunder long after a storm. Clara knew Silver Creek had shifted, but the ground beneath her feet still felt unsteady. Jack Dwyer worked quietly among them, his shirt torn, his jaw bruised. When others left, he remained, helping Clara pull beams from the rubble. At one point, their hands touched on the same plank, rough skin against rough skin, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean into his presence. That night, when Ethan slept, Clara found Jack on the porch, staring out across the valley. The lantern light caught the scar on his wrist, the mark she could no longer ignore. Her voice broke the silence. "Tell me what you're hiding, Jack." He did not look at her right away. His hand tightened on the rail, the knuckles pale. At last he spoke low. "John died because of me." The words carried heavier than the mountains themselves. Clara's breath caught, her knees weak. Jack's eyes finally met hers, shadowed with years of guilt. He told her of a debt owed to Boone, a deal gone wrong on the canyon road, and how John had stepped in when bullets started flying. The scar was proof of that night, a wound taken while her husband fell. Anger surged through her, sharper than grief. She stepped back, her hand covering her mouth, heart tearing anew. "You kept this from me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "All this time." Jack reached for her, but stopped short. "I tried to protect you, to make it right by staying, by fighting at your side." His voice cracked, unguarded in a way she had never heard before. Clara turned away, tears hot on her cheeks. She felt the weight of betrayal, but also the echo of his sacrifice, the nights he had fought for her, the danger he had taken upon himself. Her chest ached with the confusion of both fury and longing. For days she spoke little to him. Jack repaired the fences, tended the animals, silent except for simple words to Ethan. The boy, unaware of the shadows between them, still laughed at Jack's stories, still clung to his hand when crossing the yard. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara sat alone by John's grave beneath a cottonwood tree. The wind moved through the leaves, carrying whispers of the man she had lost. She laid her palm against the wooden cross and murmured, "I don't know how to forgive him, but I know I can't do this alone." Behind her, footsteps approached. Jack stood a few paces back, hat in hand, his expression worn and raw. He did not speak, only waited, as though her judgment mattered more than the life he carried. Clara rose, wiping her face. She walked past him, pausing long enough that her hand brushed against his sleeve. The touch was light, uncertain, yet enough to keep him there. For the first time, she allowed his closeness without pulling away. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the valley, covering the black scars of fire. The ranch stood smaller, humbler, but alive. Clara worked harder than ever, her son by her side, and Jack still there, mending, guarding, waiting. The town had changed too. Men tipped their hats when she passed. Women offered bread or cloth. The widow once mocked had become a figure of strength, her story spoken in hushed tones at the saloon. On Christmas Eve, Clara sat with Ethan by the hearth, the fire casting gold across his young face. Jack brought in wood, snow clinging to his coat. He paused at the door, watching them, his eyes soft with something he dared not say aloud. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. The distance between them was not gone, but something new had begun to take its place. She reached for Ethan, pulling him close, her hand lingering on the boy's head as she said, "We're still here, and we'll keep on." Outside, Silver Creek lay quiet under the snow. The valley that had nearly broken her now held a different promise. Clara Holt had stood against fire and storm, against cruelty and betrayal, and still she endured. Whatever came next, she would face it not alone, but with those who remained by her side. You've just heard one tale of the West, but there are many more waiting to be told. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WestDream Tales, where every story keeps the spirit of the frontier alive.